Hi everyone, today I'm going to be talking to you guys about how to divide a decimal by a decimal. So when you're dividing a decimal by a decimal, there are 3 steps that you have to remember. First, you have to move the decimal in the outer number all the way to the right. So that means that we're going to move this decimal all the way over to the right. So in this case, we're moving the decimal over 1 space. So it would end up right here. And second step, move the decimal in the inner number to the same number of spaces to the right as you did the outer number. So since we moved the decimal in the outer number to the right 1 space, we're going to move the decimal in the inner number to the right 1 space. So that will give us this number. So now we have 317.73 divided by 51, which will give us the same answer as 31.773 divided by 5.1. And then the last step you have to remember is to place the decimal right above the new decimal in the inner number. So that means that you put a decimal where your answer is going to go right above where your new decimal is right here. So you just translate this decimal up to here. And then the last step is just to do regular long division. So after you do these 3 steps and you get to this final equation, you can just do regular long division. So that's what we're going to do now. So I moved this over here so that we could do long division on it. And the first step in long division, which is probably a review, is to find out how many times your outer number goes into your inner number. So you start with 3, and 51 can't go into 3 because 51 is bigger than 3. So then you go out 1 and you say, can 51 go into 31? And no, it can't because 51 is bigger than 31. And then you ask, can 51 go into 317? And yes, it can, so you have to figure out how many times 51 can go into 317. And you can go about this in a lot of different ways. What I normally do is do little multiplication problems on the side to figure out what I would have to multiply 51 by to get the closest to 317. But since we know that 5 times 6 is 30 and 50 times 6 is 30, 50 times 6 is 300, which is pretty close to 317, so I'm just going to put a 6 up here and then we can go from there. So we have 6 there, and then you multiply that by 51, which I would usually do on the side, but here I just have the answer here. So 6 times 51 is 306. So you write that underneath the number that you decided that 51 could go into 6 times. So we have 306 under 317. And then you subtract those 2 numbers, and you get 11. And then you pull down this 7 next to the 11, and you get 117. And then you repeat the process again. And you ask, can 51 go into 117? And the answer is yes, because 117 is bigger than 51. And then you have to think about how many times 51 could go into 117. And since 50 times 2 is 100, which is pretty close to 117, I'm going to put 2 up there and we can do the actual multiplication from there. And then once you multiply 2 times 51, you get 102. And then you subtract those 2 numbers again, which will give you 15. And then you pull down this 3 to get 153. And then you try to figure out how many times 51 can go into 153. And since 50 times 2 is 100 and 50 times 3 is 150, I'm going to put 3 up there and then multiply it out to see how much that would end up being. And when you multiply 3 times 51, you get 153. And when you subtract that from 153, you get 0. So you know that your answer is 6.23. Now for more practice, this is a word problem. So Stella wants to compete in a 3.6-mile race. She wants to finish the race in 24.48 minutes to beat her past record. What pace does Stella need to keep her mile to finish the race in that amount of time? So when we're looking at this problem, we see that she has 24.48 minutes to run 3.6 miles. So what you want to do is divide 24.48 minutes by 3.6 miles to see how many minutes she can spend on each mile. And when you're doing this, you want to remember your 3 steps of dividing decimals. So first, we're going to set up our division problem. So we have 24.48 divided by 3.6. And then we're going to take the decimal in the inner number and move it all the way to the right, which in this case is just 1 decimal place to the right. And that will give our decimal here. And then we do the same thing to the inner number. I might have just called this the inner number, but it's the outer number. So we're going to move the inner number decimal to the right as well, which will give us 244.8. So then we're left with 244.8 divided by 36, which will give us the same answer as 24.48 divided by 3.6. And the last thing we have to do is move this decimal up to where our answer will be. And then you just do regular long division. So in this problem, we look at the outer number 36, and that can't go into 2 because it's bigger than it. And it can't go into 24 because 36 is bigger than 24. So then you have to think about how many times 36 can go into 244. And when I think about this, I think about how 30 times 6 is 180. And that is kind of far away from 244. But then when you add the other part of that multiplication problem, which would be 6 times 6, so you have 180 plus 36, that would give you around 116, which is also kind of far away from 244, but when you subtract 244 by 116, you will get less than 30, which means that 36 can't fit into 244 more than 6 times. So that's the number that we're going to start with. So at 6 up top, which when you multiply it by 36, you get 216. And then you subtract 216 from 244, which gives you 28. And then you pull down the 8 from the end of the decimal, which will give you 288. And then you ask how many times can 36 go into 288. And when you multiply 30 times 8, you get 240, which is pretty close to 288, and you still have to add the 6 times 8 in that multiplication problem. So I'm going to try 8 and see what happens. So when you put 8 on top and you multiply that by 36, you get 288. And when you subtract 288 from 288, you get 0. So you know that your answer will be 6.8. And then to answer that with the units in the problem, we know that Stella, to get a time of 24.48 minutes, she will have to spend 6.8 minutes on every mile. Now to review, just remember the 3 steps that you have to do before long division when you are dividing 2 decimals. And here's another easy way to remember these steps. So the first step, move the outer number decimal over. In this case, you move it over 2 spaces. That means you move over the inner number decimal 2 spaces, and then you translate this decimal up to the top above the line here so that you know where your decimal is in your answer.